whispers of hauntings in the woods around Powell Mountain. In fact, many will not go in those woods. They've seen things, they have heard things. So what's going on that mountain late at night? There are reports received from the river all the way up the mountain of strange sightings and strange sounds. Game wardens have been called, the police have been called. Well, the locals say they think they know what it is. Apparitions have been seen. Full apparitions have been seen. And the locals think they know who it is. And they want you to know. So here's their story. A true story of West Virginia and Powell Mountain. Powell Mountain, or also called Powell's Mountain, named for the 18th century explorer Ambrose Powell, who was the first explorer to come to this area, and he famously carved his name on a beech tree, A. Powell, along with the date 1750. Ever since, the whole mountain ridge has borne his name, and it's a very much larger area than you might imagine. The Powell Mountain is a long, narrow ridge running all the way from West Virginia in the north to the Tennessee Valley in the south, about 60 miles in total. It has an average elevation of 2,000 feet with a high peak of over 3,000 feet near Bowling Knob on the north end of the mountain. Our story is focused on a section around Highway 19, Highway 87 in Fallout 76, in Nichols County, West Virginia, which is right in the middle of the state. Yes, it's on Powell Mountain, which is the large mountain found just outside of Somerville and right off the Powell River. It was on this mountain, on January the 20th, 1827, that our story begins. It began with the birth of a little boy named Henry Young. Henry was born to his parents, Bazile and Angus Nancy Pearson Young. They lived in a small cabin on Powell Mountain. And just like most people of West Virginia in the early 1800s, they were poor, hard-working, tough, but good, honest people. Henry grew up on Powell Mountain. He went to school, church, he worked, he hunted, he fished, all on Powell Mountain. Life for the Young family and several other West Virginia families were tied together from birth to death with Powell Mountain. Now, as Henry grew older, on September the 27th, 1847, he met his true love, Lucinda James, and he married her, and they were very much in love. And on October the 12th, 1859, they had a beautiful baby girl and named her Sarah Jane. And Henry and Lucinda were so happy. They were happier than they had ever been in their lives. Yes, they were poor, but they didn't care, nor did they even know they had one another. That's all that mattered. But it wasn't going to last. Sadly, this happiness was not meant to be, because a great darkness was rising. It was not only going to cover Powell Mountain, but it was about to cover the whole nation. This darkness would cause all happiness to be extinguished, for on April the 12th, 1861, the first shots rang out from the Civil War. And West Virginia may have suffered as badly as any state, because they were so divided, maybe more divided than any other state in the Union, because they first sided with the Confederacy, and then later on West Virginia sided with the Union. But their state always had a huge division within the people of West Virginia. However, the Young family didn't join either side. Henry never put on the blue uniform nor the gray uniform. But he soon found out that that didn't mean his wife, daughter, or home would stay safe, nor Powell Mountain. For Powell Mountain, a once quiet wilderness where almost no one ever ventured, suddenly became a place for hundreds and thousands of soldiers marching through. And sadly, sometimes some of these soldiers had little to no regard for the rights of the landowners and homeowners, sometimes taking what they wanted and taking advantage of those homeowners and even the people as well. Henry, along with his cousins and some of the other residents of Powell Mountain, organized the Powell Mountain Home Guard. Henry was concerned mostly about taking care of his wife and young daughter. The people of Powell Mountain had put a lot of confidence in Henry and made him the captain of the Powell Mountain Guard. And the Powell Mountain Home Guard had grown in great number, strength, and reputation, and so had Henry as their leader. Through the summer of 1861, Henry and his men had several run-ins with Union soldiers. Now this is because the Union Army were the ones that were on Powell Mountain at this time. And Henry and his men were very successful in protecting the people of Powell Mountain and all the property of Powell Mountain. However, it caused Henry and his men to be labeled as rebel sympathizers and even traitors of the United States government. But Henry and his men stood strong and defended Powell Mountain and the families of Powell Mountain against any who would come against it. However, in September of 1861, General Rosecrans of the Union Army moved all of his troops toward the base of Powell Mountain. Henry and 4 men went down the mountain toward the troops. Now some say Henry was sent by the Confederates to see how many troops that the Union Army had. Others say that he went to talk to him about his precious mountain and family. Whatever the reason, why ever he went, this is what happened. Henry and the 4 men kept to the trees out of the sight of the Union Army. As they came down the mountain, they were eventually spotted by the Union soldiers. When they were commanded to come out of the trees, Henry came out of the trees alone, unarmed, and he was immediately gunned down by the Union soldiers. But Henry's sacrifice allowed the other 4 men to escape back up the mountain. Yes, they escaped, but Henry lay dead. He had been shot in the head multiple times, and the soldiers eventually left Henry laying right there where he fell, marching on to their next destination. In fact, it would be 5 days before Henry would be buried, because the people of Powell Mountain were afraid of an ambush by the Union troops. It was only the courage of one cousin, David Young, one of the 4 men that had gone down the mountain with Henry, that Henry's sacrifice had saved. He alone buried Henry right in that spot where he had fell, because he could not move him by himself to the cemetery. He buried him right there without a marker. In fact, it was not until 1970 that Henry's body was moved to a cemetery with a marker with his name. Today in West Virginia, Henry not only has a marker with his name, but he also has a historical marker on the side of Highway 19 in West Virginia. So maybe it was Henry's wrongful death that's causing the ghostly activity on Powell Mountain. Maybe it was the way his body was treated after he died. Or it could be just his passion for Powell Mountain and wanting to protect it and guard it, because that was his whole life. Whatever it is, there are still strange things going on on that mountain. Since the late 1800s, there have been numerous reports of full apparitions being seen all over Powell Mountain and the Powell Mountain River Valley. There have been numerous reports of a ghostly rider being seen on a horse. Written reports start as early as the 1920s of people reporting late at night seeing an apparition on a horse riding down the Powell Monument Trail right off of Highway 19. And the strangest and most frequent claim is that of the ghostly figure on the horse being spotted holding his head in his lap. Now, the interesting part to this story is that descendants of Henry Young have been interviewed, and when they exhumed the body of Henry Young in 1970 and moved him to his current grave site, his body actually was shot multiple times in the head. So, very interesting, and yes, it was severed from the body. Now, I know some may say, well, I don't believe in such things, and others say, well, that's just a silly legend that everyone talks about. It's all over the world. Well, then I challenge you to walk down Powell Mountain Trail about midnight, all alone. And if you're really brave, why don't you try doing some mischief on Powell Mountain? Then you'll be a true believer. There is even one last story I want to give you from 2013. A police report was actually made from a family that went to Powell Mountain to look at the monument, and they were so scared from seeing this figure come down the mountain that they actually called the local sheriff to come and reported on it. There was a girl, her grandmother, and another lady, and they were so taken back by this figure on the horse, they had no idea what it was. They actually called the sheriff. The report reads they were at the monument, and as they were standing there reading the monument, they heard the sound of horses' hooves running down the mountain, and they could literally feel them on the ground and could hear the horse snorting, and they looked up and could see a glowing figure coming down the trail and down the mountain. And as it got closer, the sound got louder. The grandmother stated, her name was Mary, she stated that she even felt the air getting colder as the sound of the horse got louder as the figure got closer. She noted that the figure never spoke words, but it did yell out a loud yell like it was in pain or agony as it was coming toward them. And the younger girl ran screaming toward the car. The grandmother said she was standing there frozen in fright as this figure came straight toward her. And as it came within almost 10 feet, the report says, it turned slightly and disappeared from sight, but they could still hear it as it went past them, making one more awful wailing sound. They were so scared and shaken by the incident that they had to call the sheriff. They had no idea what had happened, and they were so frightened they could not even drive away from the monument. What a terrifying and crazy story. So if you're ever on Powell Mountain in West Virginia and you hear horses' hooves, or you see something coming down the trail, my advice is step aside, be respectful, and I hope you're not wearing blue.